It actually had one of the best plots I've ever seen. Can you take us through kind of from some of your initial ideas of what you were going to do with the game to what you revised and why you revised it to what you had for the final project? Can you kind of take us through the whole development of that?
When we first found out we were doing a Star Trek game, we did first-person shooters, and they said, "Oh, you're going to do a Star Trek first-person shooter." My first thought was, "What? That doesn't make sense. Star Trek's not a shooter. It's not going to work as a shooter." And but I was like, well, maybe there's a way to make it work. I thought, well, what we need is we need a team on board, like a security team, but not just red shirts. A team whose job it is to go into hazardous situations instead of the captain beaming down every episode, And so that's how we came up with the idea of the hazard team. And at first, it was actually going to be a Star Trek insurrection game, which was even worse. I was like, oh man! But we came up with a whole crew, and we said, okay, it's going to be on the Enterprise. It's going to be with the Enterprise crew, and we're going to have this hazard team, and they were going to be part of that crew, and like Worf would be a big part of it.
Wait a second, you're a Star Trek fan, right? Isn't it the Voyager crew?
Yeah. This is when it was still. Okay. This is still when it was the Star Trek Insurrection, which was probably the weakest Next Generation movie until maybe Nemesis or something. But then it became Star Trek Voyager, and I was still like, oh well, it was one of the weaker series. But it worked out nicely because it was an ongoing show. It had a lot to draw from and we could have some influence. I actually, was a fan of the show. I'd been watching it, so I got to draw some of the characters from the show. So like one of them, Chell, was this Bolian guy. He's like blue and has like a seam down his middle of his head. He was actually a character from the show. So I got to draw him and put him into the show, into the hazard team, as like kind of like a nervous techie guy who didn't want to go on away missions. He was scared. And so my favorite thing was my favorite Star Trek game of all time was the 25th anniversary Interplay adventure game. We would go down on missions, and it was broken up into episodes and stuff. And to me, that's what Star Trek was more about. I always felt that Star Trek was about the characters and how they interacted with each other, and not so much about shooting and action. So it was very important to me that we come up with characters that we liked, that interacted with each other really well, that each had unique personalities and had backstories to them. And so I wrote up all the backstories for all the characters, came up with like a relationship chart for how they felt about each other and everything, how they felt about the main characters from the show. And I just wrote it based on that, and we did these, we could have just done straight action, but we had these parts where you would go on a mission and then come back to the ship, and John scripted a lot of these, like, and designed them and stuff, but you'd actually get to walk around the ship, talk to the people, see how they felt about the mission. Like if a character died, they would talk about it and stuff like that. And I think that's probably, at least from my point of view, that's what helped make it feel more Star Trek-y. That it wasn't just running around shooting all the time. That the characters had relationships, they had distinct personalities, and they reacted to what actually happened in the game. And so that was just a ton of fun to do and work on.
Yeah, I thought it was one thing that was interesting about Elite Force. I came into the project way later, so when the project got started, Mike may have been working on all this in the background, but the development process was, let's make shooter levels. So there's the Borg levels, and I don't even remember what most of them are, but there's a lot of going to different locations. And when I came onto the project, it was kind of time to put the story in. The story was written, they had started getting dialogue, the character models were getting done. And my job was to work with Steve Rappel, one of the co-founders of Raven, and we were putting all of the cutscenes into the game. So every time they had the mission briefings, or you'd walk around the Voyager deck and there's the guys in the bar talking about what just happened on the mission, or you'd go up onto the Voyager bridge and talk about whatever and get orders from Janeway. That was what I did, and it all came way late in the project. I think they had worked on the project for probably about a year and a half or so before I even came on, and then it was time to put all that story in.
Yeah, I think the last thing that I'd like to throw out there was that it was, how Mike said that he loves Star Trek, and this, like the Jedi games, were just such a labor of love because Paramount is pretty much like LucasArts. They're very tight. I mean, at the time that was their moneymaker. They, Star Wars and Star Trek and all those things was like, well, we're going to watch what you do because you can't break anything because we have this established. Everything is established and everything needs to go through our check boxes and because we love it and we don't know if you love it as much as we love it. Well, so we had there's this passion to do can we pull in the Mirror Universe? And it was a huge headache and it was just fighting. It was because it was, the licenses were different. I'm sorry, you're licensed for Voyager. You can't bring in, original crew or whatever. So it comes down to as a studio, how passionate were we and who did we send out and who could argue the best and who could, really complain and scream and whine until they finally just give in. And sometimes we win and sometimes we lost, but that's really a huge part of it, is especially if you're working with an outside studio or outside vendor, whatever, it's just give and take and really choosing what you're most passionate about and driving it through.
Yeah, I really liked working with Paramount on the story. I was really impressed with how much leeway they gave us, especially since I had never written for anything before. I'd gone to film school, and so I'd done some of that, but I'd never written anything like this before. So one of the things, that didn't stop me from arguing with them over things. There's this character I wanted to call Austin Chang, because it was my friend's middle name and my middle name. The character was Asian, and he was Asian, and I was Asian. We were the only two Asians ever even, right? So his name was Austin Chang, and Paramount came back and said, well, our contact at Paramount said, oh, you can't name him that. I'm like, well, why? And they're like, well, he's Asian, he has to have an Asian name. And I was like, you mean George Takei or, Harry, Harry Kim, on Voyager, they're like, well, I was like, then I came up, so I did research and I found 39 Austin Changs in the phone book and sent them to him. And he's like, all right, fine, so it was, there's some struggles there, and but it was, again, like you said, it's all about whether you're passionate about what you want and just some back and forth and just working with them. And just one other thing, when you mentioned the cinematics, another thing I loved about Elite Force was I got to use some of my film school experience because I was a director in film school, and when it came to do the cinematics, the way we'd done cinematics in the past, on our first game that I worked on, Hexen 2, the way we did cinematics was everyone would jump in a 4-player game and we'd record it with a demo feature, and everyone had to run around as the actors and hit their marks and act out everything the way they were supposed to, and we recorded that, and then we'd play back that demo, and that would be the cinematics. And and it hadn't progressed too much beyond that. We did some pre-rendered stuff, but this was supposed to be in game. So I wrote a system, a scripting system, and I incorporated a whole camera system into it that I wanted to use as a director. So instead of saying, place the camera here, set the angle to this, and move it from this point to that point, I wanted to say, lay down a track like you would on a film set. Put your camera on it, and say, I want to keep these two characters in the medium shot. And so you could say that. You could say, put the camera on this track, put these two characters in the medium shot, and as the characters walk down the hallway, the camera would dynamically just move itself down the track and keep it at a distance so that it kept the characters in the medium shot. So I wanted to make it feel like a TV show, the way the camera work was done, by giving the scripters the same tools that a director would have. So that was another thing that was really fun and cool about working on that game.
All right, well, thank you guys very much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. If you asked a question, by the way, feel free to come up. We've got a few games to give out to people that asked us questions, but thank you very much for having us.